Welcome back! My name is Baller Scuba. This is Video Games Over Time. We are still in 1982, and today we're going to wrap up Ultima 2. When we last left off, we beat the game. We defeated Minax and saved the world, arguably the solar system, across all time. We did it! With that now done, let's kind of talk about how the game holds up today, talk about my overall impressions of the game, and it's going to take a while because there's a lot to talk about here. This was one of the longer games that we had played, so it's going to be one of the times that I talk kind of the longest about my overall impressions. Playing the game today, as I've said before, my first thought is the game fun? And for me, Ultima 2 was not fun. It was not something that I particularly enjoyed because every time I booted up the game, there was some aspect of the game that made it worse for me, whether it was technical, gameplay, anything along those lines. There was something new every time, and it made the game worse and less enjoyable for me to play. Some of those aspects had to do with the fact that I was trying to record it, I was trying to show the game off, and the game just didn't seem to want me to do that. Or if it was something ingrained in the game itself, that's kind of experience to everybody. Everybody's going to share that kind of experience. There was always some aspect of the game that kind of popped up that made the game slightly worse in my mind. And the overall impression is that I didn't particularly enjoy the game as a whole as we continued on. We will start, though, with the positive aspects of the game, and then we'll move on to the negative. There's not a lot of positive aspects of the game for me. Number one, though, I would say that the graphics are pretty good. I mean, they're very similar to what they were in Ultima 1. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail later. But the improvements of the monsters inside the dungeons and the towers, I do appreciate that. The fact that they had a little bit more detail, they had color. I did like that. That's not necessarily indicative of the original game. Overall, they're very similar graphics in Ultima 2 as they were in Ultima 1, but that improvement I did appreciate. The fact that this game does have a story is also an improvement for me. Well, not necessarily an improvement, but it is a positive aspect of the game. The fact that there is an explanation for Minax and what's going on in the world and what you have to do. It's set out in the manual, but that's all right. It gave you something. It gave you a quest. You were trying to do something, and I do appreciate that. That is not something that is always common in games of the time. So I appreciate the effort that was put into giving us an idea of what it was we needed to do. And then I would say that the expansive world to explore is also a positive aspect of the game. The fact that we can go through literally the world map of Earth in several different time periods is something positive. And then on top of that, we can go across the solar system and we can go to all 10 planets. You can't land on the sun, that kills you, but you, in theory, can go to all 10 planets, including Planet X and Pluto in the solar system. There's a lot to explore in this game, and that requires a lot of programming. So I do appreciate that. With that said, I think those are the positive aspects that I had about the game. Let's start talking about some of the negative aspects. And let's be frank, a lot of these negative aspects are because Ultima 1 did it better. So to me, it's kind of a downgrade from Ultima 1 to Ultima 2. And that puts it in the negative category, even though overall it's probably better than a lot of other games that we have played, at least. So let's talk about some of the negative aspects. We'll start... Oh, no, there isn't one more positive aspect. The fact that in this game, the creation of a character has an actual effect in the game, I would say is a positive aspect. The fact that if you choose a cleric versus choosing a wizard versus a fighter or a thief, those have tangible effects in the game itself. That is a positive aspect for me. That's I think, all of the positive aspects that I have, though. Let's talk about the negative aspects, and we'll talk once again about... we'll talk with character creation. We'll start from the top. With character creation, even though you do have tangible results of you choosing a certain class or, a certain race and all that kind of stuff, overall, it didn't really matter. Kind of just like Ultima 1, you can raise all your stats, and it's in this game, it's random. In the first game, it was very much decided so that you can... kind of raise your stats independently of what your class or race is. It doesn't really matter what you have chose there. It's all just kind of random, and it doesn't really affect the way that you raise your stats. So your end character is not going to be all that different from someone else's end character. So the overall result ended up being the same because of the randomness of the stat gains. And then more or less the overall uselessness of a lot of the spells in the game. Like Magic Missile is good if you want to have that range, but other than the Magic Missile and a couple other things, it didn't really matter. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue, but then we can start talking about the battle mechanics of the game, because that is, of course, what you're going to spend most of your time doing. The battle mechanics of the game are simplified, I would say, even compared to Ultima 1, because there is no range in the game. You can get a phaser, but the quicksword is stronger. So my opinion is that the phaser should have some range on it. You should be able to shoot it at a little bit of a distance. But that's not how this game works. They took the range from Ultima 1 and removed it. If they're not standing right next to you, you can't hit them. At least that is my impression. I haven't seen confirmation of that from anyone else, but having played the game for a long time, I never hit anybody that was more than, that was a square away. If they weren't immediately next to me, I could not hit them, no matter what weapon I was using. So it seems to me that range has been removed from the game altogether. That is my impression. That is my conclusion. But if somebody has a little clip of that actually working for them, then maybe I'm wrong and I just had incredibly bad luck. That's always possible. With that said, there is also the... part of battling that was once again kind of a downgrade. That would be the fact that you no longer had any sort of on-screen indication of what it was you were fighting. So in the first game, you would be told you were fighting an orc. Orc, hits you, you hit the orc. In this game, they don't say that. Just you were hit. You just get the sound that you were hit and your HP goes down, or you attack and you land a hit. It doesn't tell you what you're fighting. You have to have the manual in front of you in order to figure out what it was you were fighting. And the manual only gave you descriptions of things that you would fight on the world map. If you were in a dungeon or a tower or even in town fighting some of the enemies, they didn't have a description in the manual. It was only on the world map that you had those. And that is, I would say, a downgrade. I want to know what I'm fighting, and I shouldn't have to look up in the manual every time and try to gauge what picture I'm looking at, especially since everything in the game kind of is on a clock. I don't have time to just pause and, not play and look up. All right, this picture matches, that enemy. Oh, it looks like I'm fighting a demon right now. Those kinds of things. And so that definitely was a negative aspect. Speaking of demons, though, the overall negative thing, the thing that irritated me possibly the most out of anything, was the sound in the game. The sound was very loud in my headphones, and I couldn't figure out how to get them to lower on my computer. So, and that's possibly not the game's fault. That could be, the technical aspects of playing it on a modern machine. But what I ended up doing was putting the headphones down behind my microphone, probably a good foot and a half away, so that you could actually still hear the sound but it didn't have to, destroy my ears. But the sound, I would say, was very bad in this game, to the point that I thought about muting the game altogether. But I wanted to allow the game to make its sound, and it was just bad. It sounds like a squeal or a whine, and that happens anytime the enemy casts a spell. And it was not only far too long, but it interrupted the gameplay, and it made controlling the character a little difficult at times. If I had to do something that had a direction to it, such as attack or transact or offer, any of those buttons that I had to attack, specify a direction in order to do, those would be interrupted during a fight. And I had to wait for the sound to end, and then I had that very narrow window of time in order to specify a direction. And if I didn't get it in time, the game had a little bit of a delay. I could easily waste 2 or 3 turns trying to get an idea of what it was I was trying to do back into the game. It made controlling the character not fun and frustrating at times. There were definitely times when it cost me HP. Because I wanted to attack left, I hit attack, and then I hear the squeal of, the enemy casting a spell, and I wait for the squeal to go away, because if you hit left during that time, it didn't register. So I had to wait for that to go away, and then hit left as soon as it stopped so that I could try to attack left. And if that didn't happen, then I would do attack pass and then try to move left. And it got very frustrating, so now I wasted 2 turns, and that's not really acceptable in a game where every turn means a lot. And every turn in this game did mean a lot. So controlling the character was also kind of a downgrade compared to the first game, because they were more forgiving in the first game, and you wouldn't be interrupted in the middle of your turn like you were in this game. And that had a bit to do with the delay, but it had a lot to do with the mechanics of how the game worked. Next, I want to talk about the game's reliance on 2 main aspects of the game that I feel are too important in this game. The first would be the importance of gold. Gold is everything in this game, and almost everything that you do is going to be reliant on gold, either directly or indirectly. In order to play the game, you just need gold. If you start the game with some sort of cheat to give you max gold, which is not that hard to do, to be honest, you can blast through the game because gold is everything. If you want to... anything that costs food technically costs gold, because the only way to get food is gold, is to buy it. So walking around costs gold indirectly, attacking costs gold indirectly, doing nothing costs gold indirectly. Walking through town ended up being the thing that cost me the most food in this game, because the towns were so big and they took away the idea that while you're in town, you shouldn't, waste any food. In this game, it costs food to walk around town. So if you're short on food, you better go to the town quick, because walking all the way across town can cost you up to like 50 food, just so you can buy more food. It was such a strange aspect of the game that everything costs gold. If you want to raise your HP, they took away the ability for you to gain HP through experience, right? You couldn't go into a dungeon, fight enemies, come out, and get HP. That's not how this game works. The only way to get HP in this game is to pay a king. Typically Lord British, especially early on in the game. But that was it. You paid somebody to raise your HP. And that was the only way to raise HP in this game. If you want to level up your stats, instead of going to the signs like you did in the first game, this game you have to go and figure out hints along the way. And eventually you find a guy and you offer him 100 gold, and then he raises a random stat for you. There are fan-made patches to fix that, so you can actually specify which stat you want to be raised. But in most versions of the game, in all official versions of the game at least, you pay a guy and he randomly raises a stat for you some of the time. Sometimes he doesn't. Anytime he said Alakazam, he raised a stat. Anytime he said thank you, I believe, he did not. That was kind of weird, but that meant that everything in the game cost gold. If you wanted to go and find upgrades to weapons and armor, you technically could go into a dungeon or a tower in order to get that done, but those were nothing compared to what you could buy in any town that sold a weapon or an armor. They had better things for you than what was waiting for you to earn in a tower or a dungeon. And by the time that you got powerful enough to go into a tower or in a dungeon and be able to survive, chances are you had a better weapon and better armor than what the game would give you inside the dungeon or in the tower. So it was just kind of strange. Speaking of which, towers and dungeons in the game, not necessary. You can completely avoid them at all times. There's no real reason for you to go in there unless you're playing a very specific Japanese port and you need trilithiums. Other than that, you can go through the entire game, and I would argue that the game encourages you to go through the entire game without ever taking a step into the tower or the dungeon. And keep in mind, that's where I would say the graphics improved the most. So they put all this effort into improving those graphics, and then made it so that the player, is discouraged from ever seeing it. It's a very strange way of programming this game, and I don't fully understand the reasoning behind it other than an oversight. But in most versions of the game, there's really no reason to go into a dungeon or a tower ever, which means that torches and tools are practically useless in this game. You don't need them for anything practical. You need them to explore, but you don't really ever need to explore. And because everything costs gold, I would say that the game discourages you from going out into the world and exploring because, and we'll get to the second thing that you're overly reliant on in this game soon, but walking around the world map, fighting enemies to get experience and gold, I would say has a net negative effect. You get less gold than it costs you to level grind to get the gold. It costs more to do it than you get out of it, which means that going out and doing your normal level grinding that you would normally anticipate in Ultima 1 or any other RPG, doing that will kill you. Like, you do not survive. You don't get enough gold to replenish your food and HP by going out and level grinding. That is until you get a ship, which is the second thing that you're overly reliant on in this game. And I would say that the ship is so important that without getting it early on, without knowing you're supposed to get it, not only will you not complete the game, you'll die. You won't survive. You'll run out of food, you'll run out of HP, you'll run out of something because you don't have enough gold to keep those up until you get the ship. Because then when you get the ship, then it doesn't cost any food. And that becomes a major turning point in the game. And it happens in the middle of a grinding session, which is why I went out of my way to show it off in the middle of my grinding session. Because when you get the ship, suddenly you start making money. Before then, you're losing money. It's a very strange aspect. And for it to be that important, I want definite clues telling me you need to get a ship. I want that either in the manual or in the game. And I've read the manual twice, and I looked everywhere that I could inside the game, and I didn't see any indication that I needed to get a ship. The only clue that I got is the one that I showed you, which is sailors wear blue tassels. That is it. That is all that you get. That, even for a veteran of role-playing games that I am, is not enough clues. That's not enough to tell me that I need to board an enemy ship and like walk into an enemy, board the ship, take a couple steps, and now I'm in control of the ship. That doesn't tell me that. That's an enemy. You sent an enemy my way, I'm going to attack it. But now you're telling me that in this one very specific case, I need to take it over, and if I don't, I won't survive. And for there to not really be any clues for that, I think is a huge oversight for the game. And it's going to cause a lot of frustration for players that don't have outside guides in front of them that were created by the players, by the fans, because the game itself doesn't really give you any indication that that's what you need to do. Sailors wear blue tassels is not enough of a clue that it's that important and you need to do that right now. Granted, eventually maybe you'll figure it out, but there's going to be a lot of people that lose characters in the meantime. So those are the two things in the game that I would say you're overly reliant on, and they're negatives because it's too much that is not indicated, and it is going to take away from a lot of people's experiences. So then as the game kind of went on from, the initial couple sessions, I found out a couple things that are, more on the technical side that I, think are downfalls of the game. The first being that the game, the way that the game saves is awkward. The way that the game saves is that when you go into a town, there's an autosave. And that's kind of just how the game works. Hold on one second. When you walk into the town and the game autosaves, it really only saves the player, the character that is in the game. It does not save the world. It doesn't save, most importantly, your vehicles. And I had to figure this out the hard way a couple times. It started in the second session when I had a horse and it was outside of town and I couldn't get rid of it. It was not that player's save. I had created a new character entirely, went in, and the horse was still there. That had to do with a previous player, previous character entirely, but it just didn't want to go anywhere. But then, that's fine to some extent, but then when I go further in the game and I have a plane, that's when things really started showing how bad of a concept this was. That the plane, I took it through a time door, and it turned out to be the wrong time door. And so then I rebooted, I closed the game and started it again, and my plane was gone. It was nowhere to be found. It wasn't through the time door where I left it. It wasn't where my character was saved. It wasn't anywhere. It was just gone. And in the spot where I was, there was no way for me to get back to get the plane. There was nowhere for me to go to get the plane. So I had to reload an old save, which once again is technically cheating in this game because you're only supposed to have the one save. But the game basically broke on me because I couldn't go further because of how the game saved. So I had to go back 2 or 3 saves that I had back and redo a portion of the game just so I could get back where I started with my plane. That is a severe oversight in my opinion. Speaking of oversights, the fact that there is no cap on anything, I think, is a severe oversight. The fact that if you have 99 torches, 99 tools, and you get another one from a thief, it just resets to 0, I think is a huge oversight. I don't think that is what was intended. I don't think that's what Richard Garriott wanted, but that is what ended up happening. It's more important, though, that happens for stats, that you can increase your stats so much that you're back down to worse than where you started the game. If you have 97 strength and you offer the clerk at the Hotel California gold and he raises it by 4, you don't now have 101 strength, you just have 1. You have started over. So you better have enough gold to keep raising that stat so that you can equip the armor that you're actually wearing. That is a huge oversight, I would say, in my mind. And it shows that Richard Garriott didn't necessarily put a lot of effort into testing or quality assurance. He didn't put the polish onto this game that you would expect. A lot of that, I'm sure, has to do with him being in school, learning a new language and all that. But I don't think it's necessarily acceptable because of how much this impacts the game for this kind of oversight to happen. Then, of course, the big technical issue with this game, it has to do with this version, but this version is the most popular, most common version, is that this version of the game does not have the maps of the other planets, right? You don't get Venus, Mars, Jupiter, I can't remember some of the other ones, but you're missing major maps of the game. Granted, you don't have to go there, but the fact that those were just plain missing and nobody caught it and nobody tried to fix it after the fact is a huge issue for me. So overall, like, the impression that I get is that this wasn't a passion project for Richard Garriott at the time, even though the story that I told implies that. It just seems like he didn't care that much about this game. And as time went on, nobody else really seemed to either. One of the aspects that I was finding playing the game today is that, I'm not going to go without a guide for a game that's not giving me enough clues. Every guide that I found lied to me in several aspects, not just once, several times. All guides that I could find were wrong about several aspects of the game. And for the wiki in particular, the things that's fan-made and supposed to be, edited, and it takes a lot to change, for that to be wrong several times, I think is a huge issue. But it shows that not a lot of people necessarily care about this game anymore. At least that's my overall impression. And then for, the ending, the final fight with Minax, I did not enjoy it. It felt like I was just kind of walking around and occasionally attacking. I think that I overall attacked either 5 or 7 times. It was an odd number, but that's all that it really took. But I had to keep walking back and forth across an entire castle to get one attack in, and then, okay, let's walk to the other side. That's not how I like fights to go. And I think that it was definitely not the way that it should have been programmed at the time. It just felt very strange, and it felt like it was overly reliant on other monsters. The fact that there's an invulnerable Balron, and invulnerable guards in each town, that seems like they would be the final bosses at some point, but no, it was this Minax. So then why was Minax so much more powerful than the invulnerable Balron that was standing right next to her? It just doesn't necessarily make sense, and it makes for awkward gameplay. And that was kind of my overall impression, is that everything in this game just came across as awkward because it just wasn't programmed the right way. So playing the game today, let's try to sum up here. I'm sure there's more I could talk about, but let's try to sum up because we've been going for a while. Overall, I would not recommend this game. Even for fans of Ultima 1, I would not recommend this game. If you are going to play this game, I would recommend cheating from the get-go. Just go ahead and give yourself all the gold in the world constantly, and make sure you know exactly where you're going. Back up the entire folder of Ultima. Don't just back up individual files. Just put the entire folder into another folder as a backup, so that in case things go wrong, and things will go wrong often, you have some sort of backup to save yourself. But I would just go in guns blazing, full on cheating, if you want to get through the game. But keep a guide in front of you, because going around the world is difficult. Going through the time doors is difficult. It's hard to keep track of where you are, even using the manual and the map. It was difficult, especially when you get to Pangaea, because that's not on the map that they give you. But you still have to figure out, okay, which one is Africa, which one is Antarctica, and that's not always made clear. So that's the only recommendation that I could give for the game, is if you absolutely need to play it, want to play it, cheat from the get-go, because there's going to be a lot of aspects of the game that try to prevent you from getting through it, and they'll get very frustrating overall. The sound is the most annoying thing, so I would also recommend muting it. it's not fun. It's just a huge grind session at the beginning, and then you can just blast through the game. It wouldn't take you nearly as long as it took me because I was trying to show things off. But this is definitely one that can be skipped. This is one that we arguably would not have played if it didn't say Ultima on it. Ultima has a prestige to it that keeps us interested, but if this was Ultima 1 or this was the only other Ultima game, we wouldn't play it. But as the game told us, there is an Ultima 3, and we will play that. I will come back and we will play that. That one is supposed to be better than Ultima 2, but we'll talk about that some other time. So don't think that I'm done with Ultima, but the only reason I think that we played this one is because it says Ultima on it. So that is kind of my overall impressions of the game. Do not recommend, but if you are going to do it, go in knowing that there's going to be issues and prevent them before they happen. So that is my modern take on the game. When the game was released, it was popular. By 1985, Ultima 2 sold over 50,000 copies of the game. In total, it would go on to sell 100,000 copies. Like many computer games of the time, it would take a while to reach its peak popularity. The critics at the time were also positive about the game. Ultima 2 was seen as one of the premier adventure games on the market. The game was seen as an improvement on the original with a larger scope and more detail. Ultima 2 would not be the final Ultima game. The franchise would continue, and we will keep an eye on the franchise as we continue. Ultima 2 itself would see re-releases and ports as well. We will also follow those as we continue. With another hit on his hands, Richard Garriott would continue to work in the video game industry. We will see more from Richard Garriott in the future. As for the recently rebranded Sierra Online, the publisher of the game, they would continue to be successful in the video game industry as well. We will hear more from Sierra in the future. That will do it for the story of Ultima 2 for now. My name is Baller Scuba. This has been Video Games Over Time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video when we violate food safety laws.